So for step 6, attaching the pinion gear. Well, we're going to grab our motor, which I have here. We're going to remove the rubber protector on there, put on the motor plate, our pinion, and our grub screw. And of course, I've got it all here. Now, we are going to use the 16-tooth pinion that came in the kit. And we've already set up the gearbox with that in mind. But depending on what you're interested in doing, you can see back on page 30, with the 16-tooth pinion, you have a standard gear ratio or a low-speed gear ratio, which of course this is what we're working with because we set up the gearbox for low-speed gear ratio. But you can see that depending on what pinion you use, you can actually set up the gearbox for low or high in completely different gear ratios. So obviously if we bought any of these other ones for the kit, then we would have a completely different gear ratio. And as this only comes with the 16-tooth, these are all optional ones, which we're not doing. So we're just going to stick with the one that came with the kit, but later on, I suppose if we wanted to, I don't know, maybe I will, just out of curiosity to see the differences. But stock, I want to see how this works. So obviously that is going to be our low speed gear ratio for this kit. So I'll just set this all up and we'll put the pinion on the motor. So the first thing we need to do is take off this rubber bit, and I find the easiest way to do that is just grab a pair of pliers, grab the end, and pull, and it's off. So that makes it very easy. And then we're going to put the motor plate on, and you can sort of see, I don't know, often I'll see the diagram, you'll see that there's sort of, you can see the shadowing of this sort of indentation into the metal, and then there's only the one showing up there. I tend to kind of follow it that way when I'm placing these things. So knowing that, we know that those holes they're talking about are here. And I mean, you can see on the motor, there's only 2 holes, which are screws. You can see the threading in there. So you know that this is going to sit like that. So that's easily done. Now, when it comes to the pinion itself, I like to use the Allen key and start it off first. So if I put that in and start threading it into the pinion gear itself, I like doing it this way because it's easier for you to see what's going on, and it's easier to get that pinion actually inside of there. So now that we know that, you can see where this needs to be, pretty much at the end, but we need to make sure that it's 14 millimeters. Now again, because this can just spin completely, I like to lock this in so that it's on the flat and can't move while we're doing the test. So if I just put that back in to the grub screw, grab our motor, put that on, I know that that's more or less the right location. So I'm just gonna spin this on. There we go. And you can see that I'm actually moving the pinion. Like the scrub screw is down enough that it is actually catching on the right spot. So now when I'm doing the final adjustments, just making sure we've got that 14 millimeter spacing, it's actually on the right spot for locking it on. So we'll do that. Let's get the measurement correct. So going back to this, you can see that it needs to be 14 millimeters from the motor plate to the end of the pinion. So if we grab our ruler here, 14 millimeters would be 1.4 centimeters. So that's more or less where this needs to be. So I'm going to try and hold this while I push that on, more or less there. So if I screw that in, and I can already tell that it's moved a bit, so I just want to grab the ruler again, 14 millimeters, roughly there, And actually, if I go down to that, it's actually bang on. So if I start spinning this on, that is correct. So there we go. There is our pinion, and if we look at the 14 millimeters, it's right where it needs to be. So it's just a matter of locking this pinion on. Now in this case, this is where I like to just put the Allen key in and just really torque on it. And you need to do this, otherwise if the pinion comes loose, you're gonna have to take this all apart when it's on the gearbox, and depending on where the grub screw goes, you may have to take the gearbox apart too. But there we go. So there is our pinion onto the motor. So once you've attached the pinion to the motor, if you're still not quite sure whether you've got this correct, the one thing you can do is grab the gearbox that we're going to be attaching this to and put it in and see where it sits. And as you can see, that actually is sitting exactly where it needs to be, and the edge of the pinion's pretty much sitting on the edge of the spur gear. So we know that that is in the correct place. So that is it for step 6. So now we're going to move on to step 7 and attach the motor to the gearbox.